for this Wednesday, October the 30th. Let me introduce to some and present to others Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., as we customarily do. Mr. Fuller, good morning, and how are you?
Good morning. I'm still learning.
You are still learning. Okay, we haven't done this one in a long time. Before we get into the 5th and the 14th Amendment, was there anything in the news that stood out to you that you would like to briefly hit on before we go into the subject matter?
Well, there's so many things going on in the news, so it's nothing specific.
Okay.
But I would, I could answer any questions that from the callers that might be about something that's current that's going on from the codified perspective that I have heard about.
Yes, sir. Okay. Well, let's start off with this. This is a Gmail from Jonathan, and he says this: Mr. Fuller, from a previous show, you mentioned that non-white people should study Thurman Marshall and how he used the 5th and 14th Amendments to win a lot of his court cases. Mr. Fuller, could you explain how important these two amendments are and why we should use them?
Well, they are part of the law in the Northwestern Hemisphere, and so we are expected to support and defend the Constitution if you're considered to be or said to be a citizen, that you have that absolute duty. That's not an option. So those amendments are part of that Constitution. Now, the only way you can support and defend the Constitution is to use it according to logic, compensatory logic. So you use it in order to do what? Well, whatever your objective is supposed to be, and it's supposed to be, according to everything I've heard, to help to produce a product called justice. So that's right in line with replacing the system of racism with the system of justice. So anything that will help along that line, or any commodity or any tool that you can use that will help to do that in a most constructive manner, then you use it. And it's just as simple as that. We're given sets of words. Words are a form of communication. People use words to talk and to write to communicate with other people, and that communication is supposed to be, should be, to do things of constructive value. That's what words are for. The Constitution is made up of words, so you use those words to produce that product. And the main product is a thing called justice, which I gave it a compensatory definition back in the 1990s, guaranteeing that no person is mistreated and guaranteeing that the person that needs help the most gets the most constructive help. That would be, from my perspective, up to this point, the best definition for the word justice, that two-part definition. And you used a thing called the Constitution, or a code, which the Constitution is a code. They call it a code of laws. And anything that you can help to produce that product called justice and correctness, which I added, and that is being in balance with the environment, with things other than people, because justice has to do with people. Anytime you talk about justice, you're talking about balance between people, or how to treat people in the correct way. But then there's a thing called correctness. In order to treat people in the correct way, you have to also involve the environment that you're in: air, water, grass, etc., etc., all of the things that exist in the universe. So that's what these tools are for. The Constitution is a tool for accomplishing that job, just like a pair of pliers or a saw, or carpentry tools, plumbing tools, depending on what you want to do. And you should be producing something with those tools. Words are tools. The Constitution is made up of words. Fifth and 14th Amendment, two of the central amendments to that Constitution. I have been told they were added to look out for the people who couldn't look out for themselves. That's what the amendments to the Constitution, particularly the first 10, they said, they call it the Bill of Rights, the founders. Also, I heard, and have heard down through the years, that the founders of the Constitution looked at it and said, well, now that Constitution looks pretty good, but it's along the lines of the old English way of doing things. Now, we got away from England because we didn't like things that they were doing there under that royal system. So we don't want what you call a royal system here. We want what we will say as a democracy, where we don't have a king or a queen. We have the people. All of the people participate in how things are going to be run. Because over there, that place we got away from, the king and the queen, they made decisions and whatnot, and there's nothing you could do about it. And they're just two people. We think that all people should have a say-so in what their lives are going to be like. So we said we're going to have a Constitution that's going to do that. But the Constitution that we got seems to be modeled on that old thing that we just left. We don't want to duplicate that. So from what I've been told, the people who made up the Constitution said, we're going to make some additions called amendments. We're going to amend it. Well, how many amendments, and pertaining to what? Well, something that's going to be for the people who, when we were over there back in England, they didn't have any say-so. So these amendments will be giving the people some definite say-so in how their lives are going to be lived. And so they came up with these amendments to the Constitution in order to be different, not to be for the sake of just being different, but a better society than what they just left, what they, fled England from. And boy, when they looked at it, from what I've been told, it was such an excellent list of amendments, which means additions to the basic Constitution, which was somewhat similar to the old English Constitution. They said, boy, freedom of speech, that'll be number one of this addition, of this amendment, and freedom to bear arms, number two, and then they got down to number five, say a right to due process and a right to compensation. And that's a part of what I write in the textbook for victims of white supremacy, compensation. That Fifth Amendment, what does it say? Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Also, you can't be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So that's what they wrote a long time ago, over 200 years ago. So they looked at that and they said, hey, but we got slaves. What about that? They say, oh, we'll say that they're not people because this Constitution starts off. We have a preamble, meaning an introduction to the Constitution. And it says what? We the people. So we'll just say that these Negroes that we got are not people. Well, if they're not people, what are you going to call them? We'll call them property. You know, like horses, cows, livestock, pigs, dogs, snakes, whatever, wagons, wagon wheels, land, property. And the slaves, our Negro slaves, will be property. So they won't be included in the Constitution. They won't be entitled to be due process and all that. The due process will be a whip across their backs if they disobey you. And somebody might say it. I'm sure one or two people may have spoken up at the time. However, nobody listened to them and said, yeah, but what we'll be doing is setting up a royal system based on Negro slavery, you know, along the same model that we just left. We'll be doing the same thing that was done to us in England, only it'll be worse. They said, well, we got them now. We stuck with them. We, you know, before we got this Constitution, so we just got to say that we can't have them be a part of it. And so that was how I was told by my teachers that it all came about.
Okay. It says here that the Fifth Amendment says to the federal government that no one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without, in bold letters, due process of law. The 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868, uses the same 11 words called the Due Process Clause to describe a legal obligation of all states. Now, according to the caller or the Gmailer, he mentioned that you stated that Thurgood Marshall used these two particular clauses in his court cases.
That's what I've been told. Now, you know, I haven't read a lot about Thurgood Marshall, even down through the years. I'm familiar with his legalistic works, which are very distinctive, basically, because he used the Constitution. Naturally, he was a lawyer. He was a Supreme Court judge. So naturally, all Supreme Court judges are devoted totally to constitutional law, supposedly. So therefore, he used that to get a lot of things done for the victims of racism. Once the victims of racism were declared no longer slaves and entitled to be included. That's the black people. At a certain point, they'd have said, well, slavery is over, so we're going to include black people in the Constitution, because they weren't under the Constitution because they were considered property.
Yes.
Before then. Now, in my opinion, that under common law, because you have three types of laws, I understand: stature, case, and common. Now, common law just means people go ahead and do what they're going to do anyway, but it ain't written down. That's common law. All right, like you have common law marriages. I mean, you don't have any papers or anything like that. But what a lot of people say, you're shacked up. So they call that a common law marriage, meaning you're doing it. You're actually doing it. You're doing everything that people do in a so-called marriage, but you don't have any paperwork on it. So it's the same way with the way racism is practiced. When you look at all the paperwork, racism doesn't exist. I mean, racism is outlawed. I mean, it's persona non grata, or whatever you want to call it. You know, it's not supposed to be. But under common law, slavery still exists because racism is slavery. So black people are still functionally slaves. Why? Because when you point out a person on the basis of color and say, I'm going to deprive you of anything that you're entitled to based on the color of your skin, you are a slave. In other words, if you are mistreated in any way, you are a slave. If you go by the definition, the pure definition, or the compensatory definition for slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Slavery is you make somebody do something that they don't want to do, and you mistreat them in the process. That's a slave.
Okay.
Slavery is nothing but mistreatment, and so that's continued. Slavery did not end.
Okay.
Because racism didn't end.
Okay. You said something. Now I got the common law down, but you said statute and case law.
Case law. What is case law?
Yes.
Case law is, you say, like in court, I have been told, you say, well, we had a case like this last month or 10 years ago, and we call it case law because it was a case in this court, Your Honor, 10 years ago, and this person was let go or was convicted or whatever and given 6 months. Now, in this particular case that we are having today, you didn't do the same thing that you did then. And it's the same law applies equally. 14th Amendment means equal protection of the law. So therefore, you're saying that this person is going to get 50 years when that other person 6 months ago got only 6 months? That's not equal protection of the law.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I'm using that as case law. That's
Okay.
what lawyers will say.
Okay.
They said they use that other case as an example for this case.
Example. Okay, got that.
Right.
What is okay then?
The statute law.
Yes.
That just means the opposite of common law, from what I understand. Meaning the statute law means it's on paper.
Okay.
That's all. That law is on paper, like the Constitution is on paper.
Okay, on paper.
All
Okay.
right.
All righty. I got that. Yeah, I want to make sure I get that down. Let's do this. TalkTeam@radio.com, as I find the paper here, is a 24/7 no-charge worldwide broadcasting facility with hosts delivering on various topics such as news, lifestyle, sports, law, health, wellness, religion, and politics. Now, here's a few that I'm going to share with you. Talking Sports Plus with Mr. Bobby along with Rita and Trent. It premieres every other week. Last night was his show, and if you missed it, you really missed it. It was an outstanding show, and not because I said so, but the man behind the glass and other people mentioned the show was just extremely good. And then we had the opportunity to run into Ricky Tyus, Your Time to Travel. He came in and we laughed and had a good time. For all your traveling needs, you might want to do that. And then, of course, we talked about Libby Rand. Her program is called This is Libby. Now, listen, all three of these shows and more are exclusive to TalkTeam@radio.com. And all you have to do, and believe me, don't take my word, all you have to do is go to the TalkTeam@radio.com homepage, click on programs, and there is a list of all the current programs that TalkTeam@radio.com carries. Give them a sample and see if you like it or don't. The only way you're going to know is if you do that. All that from TalkTeam@radio.com, radio the way it should be heard. My name is Mr. Bobby. I am the co-host on the Compensatory Concept with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. Today's discussion is centering around the 5th and 14th Amendment. Mr. Fuller, for the last 20-something minutes, has given the definitions and terms like that. Concerning that, he talked about the royal system. He talked about statute law, case law, and common law, and I did write some of those down. You may want to do that too, or if you have a good memory. And that's what our program is going to be about. But before we go on, let's take this phone call. Okay, caller, you're on with Mr. Fuller. What is your question?
Good morning, Mr. Bobby. Good morning, Mr. Fuller. Mr. Fuller, you talked about dismantling the system and a slam dunk. And the white supremacy has trained us and codified us to be a certain way, to live a certain way, to think a certain way. And based on like the people around me, my family and friends, it's hard for them to understand that they are in the system of war. You know, they are, you know, they're in the system of white supremacy. And a lot don't understand this concept. So, is it possible for us to, or are we able to decodify the minds of the people? Because, like you said, Mr. Fuller, like they are the masters of psychology. So, if that is the case, how are we supposed to, you know, decode the minds of the people who have been trained to see the world or to conduct themselves in a way that's not constructive? And that's my question.
Okay, Ms. Fuller?
Well, you go to the code book. That's what the code book is for. Now, what does the textbook for victims of white supremacy say about people who don't want to talk about racism? That's all it is. They don't want to talk about racism. Lots of people do not want to talk about racism. A lot of people who you perceive as being victims of racism do not want to talk about racism. So you simply ask the logical questions. Everything in counter-racist science is supposed to be logical. But by logical, it also means you get the results that you're seeking, too. You use logic for that purpose. Get the results that you're seeking, for better or for worse. So if you're seeking to influence people, you have to influence people by communicating with them. And how do you communicate? With words and values. So therefore, you find out what is important to a person. And that gets to like page 171 on this program. I've called these pages incorrect. But 171 and 172 of the basic textbook,
yeah, the wants.
You have 4 wants there, because everybody, every minute of every day wants something. That's, when I say everybody, I'm not only talking about people, I'm talking about every creature, every bird, every bee. That bee wants something every minute. When you see a bee flying through the air during the summer, and that bee wants something. That bee is going somewhere. It wants. That's why you see it going in that direction. It's going where it wants to go. That's a want. W-A-N-T. Every creature wants something. Every baby in a crib wants something. And you'll know that in the middle of the night if you ever had babies around you, or you've had babies, or you once were a baby. You wanted something. You wanted to stand up in the crib. You wanted to roll over in the crib. You wanted somebody to feed you. Every creature wants something. If that creature is what we call alive, that creature wants something the whole time, minute by minute, not just month by month or year by year. You have big plans, but also you have plans for the next 2 seconds. You want something. You want to sit down here because you're tired, or you want to get out of bed because you've had enough sleep and you're tired of lying in bed. You want something. So the first thing, that's why I keep harping on it, W-A-N-T. Find out what it is that people want. And on page 171 of the code book is right there. If you get lost in anything else, go right to page 171. When you get confused about anything in interacting with other people, go to page 171, 72. And what you'll find there is, what do I want to do? But you can also refine that, because you're supposed to do a little thinking according to the code. If you're dealing with someone else, it's not a matter of what you want. Find out what they want. And there it is. What do I want to do? That's what it says on page 171. Why do I want to do it? How do I plan to do it? And the fourth one is, what do I expect the constructive result to be? Now, you can ask another person, the people that you're having this difficulty with. If you're having difficulty on a job with anyone, or so-called family members or whatever, just back off. Stop trying to tell somebody what they ought to be doing. The code says you don't ever do that. You just simply ask them. Ask the person. People usually know what they want to do. So you ask the person, what do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? How do you plan to do it?
And for those who don't know, basically it's this. In a monarchy, a king or queen is head of state. The British monarchy is known as a constitutional monarchy. This means that while the sovereign is head of the state, the ability to make and pass legislation resides with an elected parliament, which they have over there. So he mentioned the royal system, and then he mentioned statute law, which is law on paper. Then he mentioned common law, and then case law, which he gave examples of. Okay, Mr. Fuller, continuing in on that, in the fifth area of people activity, on page 149, if you can turn to that right there, in the middle of the page where it says, regardless of what you may have been told, all the way down to the according. Do you have that? That's in the, by the way, that is in the revised expanded edition of the United Independent Compensatory Code System concept. Do you have that, Mr. Fuller?
149?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Basically in the middle, right there where it starts with regardless.
Right, I can get it. 149.
Yes,
I
sir.
have it here.
Yes, sir.
You say it's where now,
Starting with
regardless of what you may have been told, expect at all times to be mistreated. As a result of so-called laws and or legal systems that you are involved in and are subject to during the existence of the system of white supremacy. I'm going to repeat part of that.
yes.
Regardless of what you may have been told, I'm talking to black people now, all over the world, non-white people, expect, and this comes under the Area 5 under law, expect at all times to be mistreated as a result of so-called laws and our legal systems that you are involved in and are subject to during the existence of the system of white supremacy. Now, why would I say that? I said that because it's true. It's either true or false. Now, some people will say, well, that's not true. First of all, I'm not subject to any legal system under the system of white supremacy, but the code book, as I have written it, and this is just my opinion, says, regardless of what you've been told, you can expect at all times to be mistreated as a result of so-called laws and our legal systems that you are involved in and are subject to, and it's because you are subject to an illegitimate system anyway, overall, by birth, called the system of white supremacy, if you are a person with color in his or her skin. The white supremacists don't care anything about any laws that you say apply to you if you're a person of color, because that's their business. Their business is to see to it that their law, the law of the white supremacists, whomever they may be, is more powerful than any law that you say that you are involved in. And so that's why that's written there. So you can expect that. you go into any, on a job or in a court of law, so-called, or whatnot, you're still in a slave system called the system of white supremacy. You are a prisoner of war in that system because war was made against you before you were born.
Yes.
If you have color in your skin.
Mm-hmm.
So regardless of what people say in a so-called court, you can expect to be mistreated if you have color in your skin.
Mm-hmm.
Have that in mind. Expect to be mistreated. So you go all out to try to keep from being mistreated by using whatever words they give you, because all of court systems are about words. So you use words, including in the Northwestern Hemisphere, the Constitution, since they said you can use it, they, whomever they are,
Mm-hmm.
originally some white supremacists supposedly said that you can use it. Some of them who said that they support the same words, and also some of these people who said that they support these same words, who are classified as white, also said that they believed in these words and that it should apply to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But when it's put to a test, when it comes to non-white people, they take the position under their common law, the law of the white supremacists, that you are not entitled to use these words to do the things that are necessary to help produce justice where you're concerned.
Mr. Fuller, could
you can expect to be mistreated
Yes.
in the system of white supremacy when it comes to law. That's basically what I'm saying.
That's right.
Expect to be mistreated when it comes to law.
Okay.
Why? Because the evidence shows you usually are.
Okay. Now, could you continue right there where it says do not?
Yes. Do not expect truth to be revealed or used in a manner that results in justice and or correctness through so-called lawmaking that is directly or indirectly dominated by racist man and or racist woman, who are the white supremacists collectively. At best, expect only the expressions of so-called concern or sympathy.
At best.
They'll give you concern,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in the year 2019. Oh, the white supremacists are big on saying, I'm concerned about you, or I sympathize with you. I really, my heart is with you. But they will say, the law says, talking about racist law, I just can't help you. But I sympathize with your pain. Tell me all about how you feel, about how you're being treated, and I'll listen. I might even cry with you. Put my hand on your shoulder and walk down the hall with you. And we'll both cry together. But you're not going to get justice. Why? Because under racist law, you're not entitled to it. How am I going to have white supremacy and justice in the same court of law, on the same planet, at the same time? It doesn't work.
Doesn't work. Before we talk about your book, could you read that last little part right there, which is very important, according to
compensatory logic, a law is anything that is done. That's what a law is. If you're doing it, that's the law. You might call it common law. You might call it statute law. You might call it any kind of law. But a law really is functionally anything that is done. That's a law. This means that every time any quote-unquote police person does anything, he or she is practicing, enacting, enforcing a law of whatever it is that is being done. If that so-called police person shoots you in the back, that's law. He's not broken the law. He's not broken race law. If it's a race soldier pretending to be a police officer, and never get those two mixed up. That's why words are very important. Stop saying police brutality. There's no such thing as that. Stop saying police mistreat people. Stop saying police are an occupying force among black people. No, police officers are excellent people. Don't get the two mixed up. You've got to have police. Don't say that you're against the police, ever. You got to have the police. Police is what you want. You definitely. Police means service. It means justice. That's what policemen do. Police men and women are people. Police people. That's what they do. But a race soldier is an imposter. A race soldier is like an infiltrator, like a spy, pretending to be a police officer. So when you use these terms, police mistreat black people, that never happens. That has never happened in history. There's no incident of that ever happening. But race soldiers pretending to be police, that's a different thing altogether. That's an imposter.
Okay.
That's a spy. That's a person with evil intent. And the first requirement of being a what? Police officer is what? According to compensatory logic. Not to have arrest procedures down pat, not to have the ability to deliver babies. I mean, which is a wonderful thing. All right? The first requirement for being a police officer, according to compensatory logic, is to have what as a qualification? The correct intentions. If you don't have the correct intentions, you should flunk out of police school on the first minute you step foot in there. You set foot in there and you don't have the correct intentions. You got the intention you go around mistreating people. You have already messed up. And you're not even haven't spent 1 minute in law enforcement school yet. But you have already messed up big time. Why? Because you're going in there with the incorrect intentions.
Okay. And the last line of that sentence where it says it is important.
It is important to know and to understand that law is not the same as justice.
All right.
Laws change, but justice remains the same.
The same. Okay. Excuse me. TalkToHim@radio.com. We go where you go. Download the TalkToHim@radio.com app to your cell or to your tablet. That's radio the way it should be heard. My name is Mr. Bobby. I am the co-host on the compensatory concept with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., who is live from Washington, D.C. But it is at this time that we set aside for Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. to speak about his book. Mr. Fuller?
Now, the book that I'm reading from is the United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept, a textbook workbook for thought, speech, and or action, either thinking, speaking, acting, for victims of white supremacy. If you don't consider yourself to be a victim of white supremacy, a prisoner of war of the white supremacist system, a slave to the system of white supremacy in the year 2019, then the book does not apply to you. This book is written specifically for the individual person. For thought, you first think about whatever it is you're reading in this book, and then you speak about it, whatever you're reading, if you choose to do so, to yourself first, and to others if you prefer, and then you act on what you are thinking about and speaking about based on what you have read. And it's supposed to do what? Solve problems. If this book doesn't help you to solve a problem, it is completely worthless. completely worthless. It's about those two words, problem solving. Problem solving specifically for whom? For the individual victim of racism, slave to the system of racism, prisoner of war to the system of racism, non-white people of this entire planet. That's what the book is written for, and addressed to you, not as an organization or as a group, but as an individual person, telling you, making suggestions about what you can do or possibly should do under various circumstances in the system of white supremacy, since that's where you are, presumably. You're not outside of the system. So what you can do to unravel the system, you can't step outside of it and work from the outside because you're inside. You're a prisoner of war. So you have to work from inside the prison. So this is a code book designed to follow a code of thinking, speaking, and acting that will unravel the system and presumably replace it with a better system, which would be what? If you're going to do away with the system of white supremacy, which is a magnificent system for getting things done, but it stomps on people in the process.
Mm-hmm.
So you replace that with what? A better system. What would be a better system than a system of white supremacy? It would be a system of justice, which has never in recorded history been produced by anybody. So it's quite a task. But it always starts with the individual person. You should be that individual. I'm trying to be that individual. That's why I wrote the book. You can get the book by going to producejustice.com. Producejustice.com.
Okay. Let's go to the Gmails here. 1-877-932-9766, or you can Gmail me at the numeral 7, Mr. Bobby, BOBBY, at gmail.com. This comes from a brother from South Africa, and I meant to mention to you, Mr. Fuller, this brother is extremely pleased that the book, well, at least he has a copy. In fact, he Gmailed me a copy of a picture, a photo of the book that he has received down in South Africa. So I don't know if the book has got down here, but he got his, and he is extremely happy. And he wanted me to express that to you, that he is very happy to get that book down there. Okay, he says this. He says, Mr. Fuller, so I've seen clips of this new series called The King of Harlem, starring Forrest Whitaker. In that clip, a white man says to Forrest Whitaker, who is acting as Bumpy Johnson, he says to him, quote, "I am a white supremacist and you're a black supremacist. We have that in common," end of quote. And I've seen in our politics here in South Africa, Mr. Fuller, racist suspects pushing the narrative that black people are racist. Mr. Neely Fuller, please, could you give me your perspective on this matter? I'm seeing that we are being mistreated in entertainment and politics. How else do you think they're trying to confuse us? They also have Malcolm X's character depicted also. Mr. Fuller?
Well, the white supremacists' strength, the greatest strength that they have, is in causing confusion. So part of that confusion is to give the illusion that black people are in charge of something. But that's why I always use the prison format. If you put it in your mind that the system of white supremacy is a prison system, and everybody classified as non-white is walking around in the prison yard, or they are confined to the prison cell, what we call greater confinement, or the greater confinement within the confinements, and confinements within the confinements within the confinements. See, but a lot of confinement is about control. You confine people, like Soweto. Sowetoism, that's confinement. so-called black neighborhoods or black communities. No such thing as a black community in a prison system. It doesn't exist anywhere on the planet. And so that term should never even be used, black community. That should be out of the lexicon, out of the word use altogether. A community has strength. It has protection.
Mm-hmm.
It can support itself. That's what a community is. There's not but one community on this planet, and that is the system of white supremacy. The community, the commune, the communist, capitalist, socialist, royalist system called the system of white supremacy. That's a community. All right? They got the muscle. I mean, they go where they please. Black people only go where they're allowed to go by the white supremacists, anywhere on the planet. That so-called passport system means just that. It means it's got to, but it doesn't have that on it. But what it really means is, if you're a person of color, you get permission from the white supremacists to go anywhere on this planet. So when they say that, I haven't seen that movie that he's talking about, but if he's talking about some black person being in charge of something, immediately think about the prison system. In a prison system of white supremacy, you have black people walking around in the prison yard who have been called trustees, or they have been called people who are given privileges, or they have some type of status where they have been favored by the wardens of the prison masters. And you had this on plantations. I mean, you have this in any hierarchy. You have people who are assigned to watch other people. All right? You have people who have better jobs in the prison than other people. So a lot of black people on the planet now, here in 2019, have been given fancy titles. That's all that they have. They don't have any muscle in the system of white supremacy at all. It just seems like they do.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them ride around in limousines and expensive garments and flashing diamonds. But the white supremacists are in charge of every part of it. They don't have anything. They would be naked walking around in 15 minutes if the white supremacists decide that. And many people make the mistake of thinking, because they're given a little leeway, that they have some muscle, even sometimes a little bit of muscle that they can get in the white supremacist's face, and because they got an AK-47 in a photograph by their side, all right, and they get themselves photographed with an AK-47, stop and think about that AK-47, which is a rifle. Where did they come from?
Excuse me, Mr.
That
Fuller.
person sitting there acting all pompous and whatnot, like he got some muscle, can't even fix that AK-47.
Pardon me.
White supremacists telling them how to do it.
Pardon the interruption, Mr. Fuller, but they're giving me the signal that I have to close the first hour down. Pardon me. Excuse me, and to the listeners, excuse me. TalkToMeRadio.com, the world's greatest radio the way it should be heard. We will see you.
K&E World Network, LLC.
Live call-in talk show. Dial 1-877-932-9766 and join the conversation here on TalkToMeRadio.com.
This is the Compensatory Concept with Mr. Neely Fuller, heard exclusively on TalkTainmentRadio.com, the world's greatest radio the way it should be heard. And now, Mr. Neely Fuller.
If you do not understand white supremacy, which is racism, what it is and how it works, everything else that you understand will only confuse you. Only confuse you. Only confuse you.
Welcome to the second hour of the Compensatory Concept with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. here on TalkTainmentRadio.com. You can call into today's show if you'd like at 877-932-9766, or you can Gmail me, the numeral 7, Mr. Bobby, B-O-B-B-Y, at gmail.com. Our subject today is the 5th and 14th Amendment. And we are actually out of, Mr. Fuller's out of the fifth area of people activity called the law. And he just mentioned a few moments ago about a law enforcement officer or police officer. Mr. Fuller, on page 151, a question was asked on that page, right in the middle, since you had brought this up. It said, what are the duties of a correct law enforcement officer? You see that right there?
On page
151, right in the middle.
151.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me get to it here. I think, let's see, 151. Okay. What are the duties of a correct law enforcement officer? That's a question. The answer, it says here, the basic duty of a correct law enforcement officer is to have the correct intentions. I mentioned that earlier.
Yes.
Have the correct intentions, which is to help produce justice. Protect and serve is what the slogan is in the Northwestern Hemisphere among a whole bunch of law enforcement officers. Protect and serve. Protect what? And serve whom? Okay, so you got to find out in law enforcement school, what are you protecting and what are you serving? Whom are you protecting and whom are you serving? If you're a correct law enforcement officer, you're protecting the people in order to serve the people. What people? All people. In doing what? In producing a product called guaranteeing, in my opinion, or in the opinion of many so-called departments of justice, a product called justice. Guarantee that nobody's mistreated. Nobody is ever mistreated. And guarantee that the person that needs help the most gets the most constructive help. That's why some law enforcement officers, even though they're not assigned to do it, may pull somebody over that's driving erratically, and they find that the person that's driving erratically, because they're trying to get to the hospital, and the person who is doing the driving is pregnant. It's a lady who's fixing to have a baby, and she's trying to drive herself to the hospital, and she's feeling pains, so she's driving erratically. Now, the law enforcement officer does not, if he has the correct intentions, say, I don't care what your problem is, lady, you're driving erratically, and so you're going to get a big ticket. And so now whatever other problem you got, you can iron that out with somebody else. My assignment is to give out tickets. I'm a traffic officer. All right. Well, that's not the correct intentions. And even though it might not be specifically in his or her job description for that law enforcement officer, what you do is what? Protect and serve. You evaluate that situation right there. Everything isn't in the handbook. But you make judgments based on what? The intention of protecting and serving in order to produce a product called justice, which means guaranteeing that no person is mistreated and that the person that needs help the most gets the most constructive help.
Yes.
So many law enforcement officers deliver the baby themselves.
Okay.
I mean, and give the lady as much comfort as she can possibly get until he or she, the officer, can get some backup help.
Okay. Let's take a call. Okay, caller, you're on with Mr. Fuller. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Bobby. Hello, Mr. Neely Fuller, Jr. This is Xavier. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I know I might be off a topic, But the question I have for you, Mr. Fuller, is when you first discovered your calling in life, what were some of the challenges you had with people around you, as far as family and friends, that didn't see the same calling that you had on your life?
What is the question now?
Okay, when you first started discovering about this system of white supremacy / racism, and you started expressing to people that you knew, what were some of the challenges that you had when you first started expressing it to people around you?
I didn't get that last.
Challenges, he said, that you faced when you came into the knowledge of what was going on and happening in regard to racism.
Oh, what was my reaction to their reaction?
From the challenges that you personally had to face.
The challenges.
Yes.
Oh, well, one of the first people that read my book, he gave it back to me and he said, "You know what you got there, Fuller?" And I said, "What?" It was a fellow that I worked with on a job. He said, "You got nothing there. There ain't nothing in that book. You just spent your time writing something, ain't you? I don't see nothing in there that I can use." And my reply, if I understand your question correctly, was, that's exactly the way that the book is supposed to work. If you don't see anything in there that you can use, then, hey, I'm not out here trying to give somebody a problem that they don't have. The book is supposed to be designed to help the individual person with his or her individual problem. Because the theory is, if you solve the problem of each individual person of color, you automatically solve the problems of all of the people, of persons of color, of all persons of color. That's the theory. That's the mathematics. That's the logic. If you solve the problem, each individual, everybody on the planet has some type of problem. If you solve the problem in the most constructive manner of each individual on the planet, in the most constructive manner, you have a constructive world. And you have solved the problems of everybody because you solved the problems of each individual, because people are individuals. The whole idea of the compensatory concept is aimed at the individual person. Mm-hmm. And so that person that steps forward and say, Fuller, like the gentleman did with me when I showed him the book, say, I read that, man, I stopped reading it, man, because there ain't nothing in there I can use. And I said, that's exactly the way it's supposed to work. Because the only reason there's nothing in there that you can use is that you don't have a problem that's affecting you in any way that you can't solve yourself. You have solved the problems that you say that you have. The book is supposed to be about problem solving. Mm-hmm. If a person doesn't have a problem, then what is there, what use do you have for the book?
Yes.
Except to hand it to somebody who says they have a problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Lots of black people say, I don't have a race problem. I don't know what this crackpot Fuller is talking about. And all the rest of them out here talking that stuff. I don't have no race problem everywhere I've ever gone.
All right.
People just open that door for me. White people, black people. I don't have no race problem. I ain't got no problem.
Okay. This is this Gmail is from David. He says this: recently, a congresswoman, and I won't say her name, had nude photos of her private parts put on a website. The nude photos show that she has a possible Nazi tattoo in her groin area. Many people, including myself, believe she is a suspected white supremacist. A lot of non-white people says she is not a suspect white supremacist because of her political position on LGBTQ issues and her political party, the Democrats. This is causing a lot of, in capital letters, confusion for non-white people. Mr. Fuller, the code says racist man and racist woman will continue to practice white supremacy to dominate and mistreat non-white people for fun, glory, personal gains. My question is, according to the code, what, and these are in capital letters, what specific role does the racist woman play in maintaining the system of white supremacy? Thank you. I will continue to support the program because it is so needed in these troubling times. David.
Well, if the person that wrote that in has read the book or been listening to the program, every white person on the planet, according to the code, every white person in the known universe, in the system of white supremacy, which is the only government of the planet, who is able to be a white supremacist, underline the word able, is, according to the code, automatically a racist suspect. In other words, they are suspected of being a white supremacist based on having the ability to be one. Now, that sounds harsh, but it isn't. It's logical. Why? Why is it logical that every white person who is able to be a white supremacist, as long as white supremacy exists, should be suspected of being one, regardless of what they do? They should be suspected of being one. Why? Where's the logic? Where's the justice? Here's where it is. There is no master list that I know of, and if there is one, someone can reveal it to me, of who is and who is not a white supremacist. So under the laws of circumstantial evidence, somebody's got to be a white supremacist. So just like in any criminal situation, and the entire planet is a criminal situation, you suspect whomever are the usual suspects. And who are they? They could be anybody. Why? In a system of white supremacy. Because the white supremacists are known for what? Deception. They know how to fool people. They have hundreds of ways of fooling their victims. That's how their victims became victims. The white supremacists are masters of deception. They are masters of causing confusion. They are masters of making you think that they are not white supremacists when they are. So if you see two white people coming down the street, the question is, are both of them white supremacists? Are none of them white supremacists, neither one of the two? Or is one of them a white supremacist? And if one of them is a white supremacist, and there's two of them, which one? You don't know. And when will you know? It's when they prove it to you, either one of them or both of them.
Yes.
As an individual person. Because according to the code, no black person can single out a white person and say that white person in the system of white supremacy is not a white supremacist. And step two, prove it to another non-white person, person of color. Now, I can make that determination, for example. Neely Fuller can point out a white person, maybe, for example, and say, I know that this white person is not a racist. I've known this white person for years. I've seen this white person make all kinds of sacrifices. And I am saying to the world that I am vouching for this particular white person as not being a racist. The code absolutely prohibits that. Why? Because the code says every white person has to prove to every non-white person on the entire planet that he or she is not a racist. And no non-white person can vouch for a white person as not being a racist.
Can you say that again, please?
No non-white person is qualified to vouch for a white person not being a racist in the system of white supremacy. And it's a logical reason for that. The white supremacists know how to convince one or two black people that he or she is not a racist, or 1 or 2,000, or 1 or 2 million. They know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
They are very deceptive, and they know how to really work at it.
Okay.
Make all kinds of sacrifices. I mean, throw their child into the fire. I mean, to save a black person and all this type of thing. Okay? But the white supremacists are percentage people. And those who are the greatest of the deceivers, the greatest people who are artists at fooling people, know how to convince thousands sometimes of non-white people, I am not a racist, and I have proven to 2,000 black people that I'm not a racist. I got 2,000 black people that I can vouch for that can prove that I'm not a racist.
Okay, got to leave that
Now,
one.
that 2001, that one black person who hasn't been proven to is not in that 2,000, what that black person is supposed to do is say, okay, you proved it to those other 2,000. Now I'm number 2001. You got to start all over again and prove it to me.
Okay. Pardon me, Mr. Fuller, I have to do this. TalkToHim@radio.com is a 24/7 no-charge worldwide broadcasting facility with hosts delivering on various topics such as news, lifestyle, sports, law, health, wellness, religion, and politics. Here's a few that I'm going to share with you. All in the Family with S. Yolanda Robinson, Conversation with Don Corina, and the Quay Morgan Hill Show. Again, as I've often mentioned, these shows are exclusive to TalkToHim@radio.com, and all you have to do is go to the TalkToHim@radio.com home site, click on programs, and there is a complete list of all the current shows that Talk to Him at Radio carries. You need to give it a sample to see if you like it or don't like it, and that's all you have to do. All that from TalkToHim@radio.com, radio the way it should be heard. My name is Mr. Bobby. I am the co-host on the Compensatory Concept with Mr. Neely Fuller. By the way, I don't mean to interrupt Mr. Fuller when he is talking, but I am required at certain intervals to break in, so I'm trying to limit as much as I possibly can, break it in. But when he's giving his examples, and they are just outstanding, I want to listen to it too. But I don't mean to do that. That's just for those who, anyway, that's just for a certain group of people. Anyway, back to the Gmails, 1-877-932-9766. I hope you accept that as an apology. Anyway, this comes from this brother. He says this, Mr. Fuller. He says, I heard a brother on last Wednesday's show asking Mr. Fuller why we don't seem to get it. It's really two things. Number one, all lies of white greatness are in the subconscious minds from church, T-E-L-L, a vision, public miseducation, etc. And number two, we are overly emotional. Combine those two, and you have a perfect recipe for brainwashed slaves. Mr. Fuller, I would like to ask, can we overcome white supremacy while we are still practicing their religion, which denigrates us, and tell us to obey our masters, and that females are filthy and on their periods.
What's that part about the female?
And that females are filthy on their periods.
Oh, the females are
Filthy, dirty, nasty, whatever filthy means.
if now any blame for racism is being put on black females, no. All prisoners of war are equal. There are no big-time prisoners of war and little scrubby prisoners of war, or if you might use the term, dirty prisoners of war. We are all prisoners of war. We were prisoners of war before we were born, if you're a person of color. Prisoners of race war. Prisoners of the system of white supremacy. We're born in prison. All prisoners are equal. So one can't really talk down to the other, and one really shouldn't talk up to the other. Or you might have some prisoners who strut around in the prison yard saying they are king of the cell block, like you have in every, what we call greater confinement. You have that in every prison. But that doesn't mean anything to the warden. That might mean something to the other prisoners. But within the greater scheme of things, that's zero power. That's just somebody pretending. Why? Because all prisoners, you are in there. You are in there. So you are equal to every other prisoner in there because you are subject to the whiplash of the warden, of the prison masters, the white supremacists. So therefore, one cannot criticize another. I don't criticize other black people. Some other black, the code doesn't permit that.
Yes.
They're calling another black person a coward.
Okay.
Or something like that. Or any other name. You're not supposed to be doing any name calling at all anyway.
Yes, sir.
It's just another prisoner. People have different levels. Say, you have some black people who are afraid of the white supremacists. Well, you have some that have more fear than others, but we're all got from under white supremacy, so you're just equal to the other prisoners in the prison system.
Okay. He asked in the first part of that question, can we overcome white supremacy while we are still practicing their religion, which invites us and tells us to obey our masters?
Oh, well, see, the white supremacy is the religion of white supremacy. The white supremacists are not Christians. They're not Jews. They're not Hindus. They're not Muslims. But white supremacist has one religion. One. And what is the name of that religion? In capital letters. The system of white supremacy. But the white supremacists will walk around and say that they'll say that they are a Christian at 10 o'clock, and at 10:15 they'll say that they are Hindu. They'll say that they are Confucianists. They'll say that they are Buddhists. They'll say anything. Why? Because the white supremacists do not care what they say or what anybody says, as long as they can still practice white supremacy. That's a part of their science. That's a part of their stock and trade. To be able to say anything and be convincing while they are saying it. Say it with a straight face, and then change what they said 5 minutes later and say that with a straight face. And you will say, well, what you said 5 minutes ago, sir, contradicts what you're saying now. And they will say, what are you talking about? Are you crazy? I don't have any contradictions. And you say, well, you just contradicted yourself. And you say, says who? We say, well, I'm saying that. I know what I'm hearing. And the white supremacists will say, I don't know what you're talking about. Furthermore, this conversation is over. Get back in your cell. See, that's the bottom line. See what I mean? You can't beat them in an argument. You think you're going to do that? You don't understand the power of the white supremacists. When you think you're going to beat them in an argument, you're fighting a losing battle. Why? Because the warden does not have to prove anything to the prisoner.
Mm-hmm.
Not anything. Like the movie Shawshank Redemption, when Andy Dufresne told the warden that he was being obtuse.
Ooh, yes.
You think that meant anything to the warden? But that word obtuse meant something to Andy Dufresne. It meant that he was going to do a couple of months in the hole, which is what he did.
Yes.
And the warden even reminded him about, now, how do you think about me being obtuse? I'll show you obtuse. Because the warden said, I don't care what kind of words my prisoners come in here with. I'm the word master. Why? Because I'm the master over them. That's why. Yes. Okay.
I
can harm them and they can't harm me. That's the bottom line.
All righty. Let's see here. Caller, we're going to get you after the break. Also, for those who are listening, look up the Brady list of 1963. We're going to try to hit on that. TalkTainmentradio.com. We go where you go. Download the TalkTainmentradio.com app to your cell or to your tablet. Podcasts are available. That's radio the way it should be there. Stay right there. We're going to get this call, and then we're going to get this Gmail and try to explain what the Brady list of 1963 is and how it coincides with our program today about the fourth. So, caller, you are up with your question for Mr. Fuller. Go ahead, please.
How you doing, Mr. Bobby? Mr.
Yes, sir.
Fuller?
Mm-hmm.
Brother Negro from Baltimore.
Hey.
Hey, how you doing, brother? Mr. Fuller, I have a statement and a short statement and a question. About a week ago, I was speaking to a 62-year-old admitted white supremacist. Again, I say admitted white supremacist. I didn't have to suspect. He let me know right out front that he was a racist and he was a white supremacist. Now, my question to you is, can you explain for my care unit in Baltimore how non-white people are most confused about racism, white supremacy, and white people aren't confused?
Oh, very simple. Because white people are born into a prison system called white supremacy. And black people are born into a system called white supremacy. But the white supremacists are supposed to, from birth, let black people know that they are not in a system of white supremacy, that they are in a world of justice and righteousness and goodness. That's their assignment. They are supposed to tell their victims, there's nothing better than this. This system that you're in is nothing better than this. You can't get no better than this. You are in a system called, and they have all kinds of names for it, capitalism, democracy, righteousness, Christian, Catholicism, Mormonism. Oh, they have all kinds of names for, things that are so good for you. I mean, it's just made for you. I mean, embrace it. Americanism more than anything. Grab it. Okay. And here the code says that, you just listen to the words. And what you do is just ask the definition of each one of the terms that they use. That's a part of the code. And there's a word guide that's a part of the code to help you along with what questions to ask when the white supremacists are using these terms, because that's their power. See, some white supremacists will say, yes, I am a racist, implying that the person standing next to him, who is white, is not. But he or she doesn't say that. They just say that they are. Now, what does that do to the black person who's standing there? The black person assumes that the white people who didn't say that are not racist. And that's exactly what that white supremacist wanted you to do. So all the focus will be on him, which is exactly where he wants to focus, and not on that ocean of white supremacists who are just as much white supremacists as he or she is. That's the trick. And so black people have this thing of, well, yeah, down there in that town where I came from, there's some racists in that town. Man, you know, that's why I left there. And I came here. I mean, I wanted to get away from that. Well, according to compensatory counter-racist logic, there's no way to get away from the power of the white supremacists, because the white supremacist power is everywhere, including all the places where you don't see any of them physically.
Okay. All right. Brother Muko, thank you so much. Missed you calling, but thank you for calling in, brother. Appreciate that.
Man, I appreciate you, and I'm always listening in and tuning in to you and Mr. Fuller, two of my favorite people in the world.
Okay.
Y'all take care.
All right, thank you. Okay, let's do this. Let's move on to this so-called Brady list. Now, this came from one of our Gmailers, Kathy. I'm not going to mention her last name, although I could, but I'm not going to do that. But she spoke about the Brady list, and I've never heard of it. Have you heard of that, Mr. Fuller?
Heard of what now?
The Brady list.
Brady list? Never heard of it.
Okay. Let me give you a brief description. This is the Brady list refers to the case of Brady versus Maryland in 1963, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary and subsequent line of cases requiring prosecutors to disclose expository material to defense attorneys, including information that could be used to potentially impeach the credibility of law enforcement officers. Now, Kathy wrote this. She said, the Brady list from 1963, Mr. Fuller, just announced, if you came into contact and were arrested, had these cops testify or write up anything, you can get it overturned. 1,200 cops nationwide. The Brady list, if cops lied or had misconduct, you can challenge and get off or out of jail. Any charge, probably CPS intervention. 2, property seized, all of it, a gift of liberation, free man, free woman, free children, free families, is the cops on this list. No matter how old the charges, they can be, your records can be clear your names, and so forth. Now, I've never heard of that, and you say you haven't either, Mr. Fuller?
I've never heard of it.
Okay.
But we have been informed, and everybody who that might help should get that information if it's going to help them to do what? To promote constructive results. Hello?
Yes, yeah, you're still, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, that's what codification is about. Anything that helps anybody to get constructive results, underline the word constructive, should be promoted, should be publicized. Anything. That becomes a part of what you might call the counter-racist code.
Mm-hmm.
And in answer to the previous caller, what we need is to follow a code. That's all it is. How can we do this? How can we do that? And that's what I've tried to write a format for. There's no such thing as the whole code. Somebody asked me years ago, Fuller, where's the whole code? Is it in your book? And I said there's no such thing as a whole code until all problems are solved.
Yes.
And you know, how many problems are there in the entire universe? All kinds of problems. Problems I never heard of that are problems, or never recognized as being problems. But until all problems are solved, you don't have a whole code.
Mm-hmm.
Code just means when a certain things happen, that's what it is. You look at what is happening. First thing you want to do is look at it. And then you say, is this a problem? And if it's a problem, codification is about problem solving
Okay.
in the most constructive manner.
Oh.
That's all a code is. So in answer to a lot of people's questions who called in today, the different things about black males and females and all like that, and how black females have to stop being so trashy and all that, it has to do with codification. And the one word that's important in codification that stands out, constructive. All of your activities are supposed to be constructive. When you look at Halloween that's coming up in a couple of days, you look at that and say, now, what is Halloween? That's the first thing you want to know.
Mm-hmm.
What is it for? And is the result of Halloween supposed to leave you with a constructive result? When you go through the Halloween process, whatever that is, do you have a constructive result or a non-constructive result? Because that's what everything is supposed to be about.
Mm-hmm.
It's real simple. Codification is real simple. I want to say this to the entire world. It's simple. It's not complicated. Everything is either constructive or non-constructive. Keep that in mind.
Yes, sir.
If you're a person of color and you are doing anything of constructive value, you are eliminating the system of white supremacy just by doing something constructive.
Yes.
I don't care what it is. And the more things you do constructive, the white supremacists are having fits.
Yes.
Because a black person is never supposed to do anything of constructive value.
Okay.
Right.
Before we talk about your book, which we're getting ready to, I was told that the name of the program for Sarah Robinson is called All in Our Family, not All in the Family, which is another show. Am I correct? All in the Family. Okay. All in Our Family. All in Our Family, which is part of the thing on one of the programs that Talktainment Radio has to offer. It's called All in Our Family. Right, Galen? He's looking at me and shaking his head right. Okay, so we got that right. And before we answer go to your book, Mr. Fuller, it says, can a white person vouch for another white person as being a racist white supremacist? It says, can a white person vouch for another white person as not being a racist white supremacist?
No. Any white person who is able, I'm going to emphasize this again, according to the code, any person classified as white and functioning as a white person on the planet, right this minute, in 2019, any person classified as white and who functions as quote unquote white, who is able to be a white supremacist, should be suspected of being one until proven different. Now, proven to whom? To each and every individual non-white person on the planet. You got to prove it to each individual. Saying that you're proving it to the masses of black people, or classroom of black people, or on a job, or any what you call locale, that won't cut it. In order to really prove that you're not a white supremacist, you've got to prove it to every non-white person on the planet. Individually. Because everybody's an individual. no such thing as mass proof in the business of counter racism. I mean, that's just law, and it's based on logic. Why? Because the white supremacists are masters of deception. So it's very easy for many white people to prove to huge numbers of non-white people that they are not white supremacists. And even when, and particularly when another white person says that that other white person is not a racist, absolutely not. Mm-hmm. I mean, because then that brings into question what? Who did this kind of talking? I mean, why are you saying that your buddy is not a racist? He's white, but he's not a racist, and you're white. Well, who are you? Because the code says you're a suspect too.
Yes.
And now that you said that, what you just said, you're even more suspect by saying that that other person is not a racist. Mm-hmm. How do you know? How do you know that you are not a racist doing this talking about the other person who may or may not be a racist? But according to the victim perspective, both of you are racist suspects. That's what you say. You never tell a white person under any circumstance that he or she is a racist. Never say that unless the white person says that he or she is a racist. They identify themselves as that. But you say, sir, you are a racist suspect. And if the person says, suspected by whom? You say, by me.
Okay.
and then you give them the reason.
Okay.
The code.
The code. Talk to him at radio.com. We go where you go. Download the Talk to him at radio.com app to your cell or to your tablet. That's radio the way it should be heard. My name is Mr. Bobby, the co-host on the compensatory concept. We have about 8 minutes left. But this is the time that we have Mr. Fuller talk about his book, and then after he finishes, I'm going to try to squeeze that last phone call in. So, Mr. Fuller, go ahead and speak to your book.
You can get the book by going to producejustice.com. Producejustice.com. Most of the things that I have talked about on this program are in the book in detail. And the book is an instruction book or a suggestion book in answer to the questions, hopefully most of the questions or a substantial number of the questions, certainly not all the questions that people would have about being a victim of racism and what to do about it on a daily basis. That's what the book is supposed to be designed for. Not wait to go to a meeting once or twice a year and hear somebody make a long speech about racism.
Yeah.
That's not what it's about. It's about what to do about whatever your circumstances are while you're on the planet, either directly or indirectly. What to do each and every day, each minute of the day, what you're supposed to be doing. That comes under economics, the use of time and energy. Mm-hmm. There's 4 things that are listed in there as suggestions. You don't have to do them because you're your own law enforcer when it comes to counter racism. Nobody is your law enforcer when it comes to counter racism because nobody has countered racism. So you don't have to really even listen to Fuller. Ultimately, you make your own decisions. Pick out what will work for you out of the book.
Okay.
The things that won't work for you, leave it alone. But go get the book by going to producejustice.com. Producejustice.com.
Okay. All righty. We're talking about the 5th and the 14th amendment today, but we have this question here. Go ahead, caller. You're on with Mr. Fuller.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Fuller. I have children. And, I'm explaining them, they're 10 and 5 years old, and I'm explaining them the system of white supremacy. And I tell them that we live in a global system of white supremacy. One of the things I struggle with is to give proof and examples of how we are currently being dominated in all 9 areas of activity. quickly, if you were just in the elevator or we were in a quick little car ride, and I know we got like 1 minute or 2 minutes left, if you had to give examples that you were going to explain to children to show them how we are being dominated by white supremacy in all 9 areas, how would you proceed to do that? It with, like I said, with children, and you only got like a short amount of time.
Yes, people have often asked me, "What do you tell children?" You tell children the same thing you tell anybody, because we are all children in the system of white supremacy. I mean, you talk to people the way that they, they're people. They are people. All victims of racism, regardless of age, are still victims of racism. So how do you talk to people? That's the thing to concern on, not children, because we're all children in the system of white supremacy. All non-white people have been forced into childhood and kept there. And so we are all children. Prisoners of war are children, childlike state of condition. So you tell your prison mates what your offspring are. That's who they are, your prison mates. They're in the same cells with you. So you tell them the same thing you tell all the rest of the prisoners when they ask you a question. And that's the best time to tell any of them anything in answer to your question. The best time to talk to people about any subject is when they bring up the subject. You don't try to indoctrinate people because you might confuse them.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to do that. So you wait until they start asking questions. Daddy, what's this? Daddy, what's that? Why is this happening? Why is that happening? I saw something on television. What is that? Can you explain that? That's the time to have the answers ready. And if you don't have the answers ready, you still have this answer ready. I don't know. But since you asked me, I am going to try to find out, and when I get the answer, I will get back to you. That's what you do, each and every day.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller.
Thank you, caller. All righty. Mr. Fuller, in the remaining minute and a half that we have in this program, today's program, there's been I've been receiving a lot of Gmails concerning chicken, and I guess there's a place called the Chicken Council or whatever. I never heard of it, and I didn't investigate that. But I noticed that there's been a lot of advertisements for chicken and chicken sandwiches all over. But one of the callers that calls into the show indicated that he is suspect about this chicken, being that this is what they say. They claim no hormones or steroids are being used in these chickens. In relation to food poisoning, things that we cannot detect. And the market seemed to be aimed at particularly black people. I'm not going to say the names of the company, but all this rush on this chicken, being that you are that they, being white, the racists are suspected of doing things. Could you see them doing things like this, poisoning the food or poisoning the chicken to cause us to eat it and get all kinds of diseases?
Yes. The answer is yes, a flat yes. I went and bought some chicken that had all of these on the labels, no antibiotics, no this, no that, whatnot, but it tasted funny. I mean, now some of it didn't, but I got some that tasted what, quote, unquote, funny, which wasn't funny. I mean, and I wondered about it.
Mm-hmm.
I said, now, this is advertised as having no poisons, being vegetarian red, all that, but in anything that the white supremacists make available to non-white people, the trend of thinking should be, what are they up to now?
Okay. Well, we got to
always suspect that if they're directed,
okay,
like if you see it advertised on television, it's something that black people should be embracing.
Okay.
Always suspect that they are doing what?
All right.
Harm to you.
All righty.
Harm. That's what they do.